Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. There are certain things that this channel doesn't reflect, and one of them I was thinking is my love of classical literature. Now, in typical Jorge fashion, I am not going to express that love by telling you about the Iliad or the Odyssey because I feel that that would be a little bit too obvious for me. Today we're going to look at a very different kind of epic. The Argonautica, or the Voyage of Argo, or Jason and the Argonauts. It's known by any of those titles by Apollonius of Rhodes. Let me tell you first about the editions that I have experienced. This is the latest one that I have read. It's a verse translation published by Penguin, of course, as you can see, and it is by Aaron Poochigian. If you want something that is closer to the original in terms of the form, then I would say go with this one. I liked it very much. But before that, there's another version or another rendition published also by Penguin titled The Voyage of Argo. This is a prose version of it, and it is translated by E.V. Rieu. So if you just want the story, then you can go with this one. I was very happy with both of them. So let me tell you that. You have those two options right there. First thing we want to do is we want to place this text in some kind of timeline. So we're going to explore very briefly the historical context right here. As you may know, the Iliad and the Odyssey, these are texts from the 8th or maybe 7th century BCE. The Argonautica is from the 3rd century BCE. So we have the Hellenistic period. This is a different worldview, and as a result, it's a different text. The Hellenistic period basically covers the years 323 BCE, so that is basically the death of Alexander the Great, to the year 30 BCE, which would be the Roman conquest of Egypt, and also the death of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. This is a time when Greek culture was basically blended with Egyptian, Persian, Near Eastern, and also Central Asian traditions. So we are talking about a cosmopolitan hybrid civilization. Now, let me add to that, if we want to talk about the approach that this poet Apollonius has, the fact that he was the director at one point of the Library of Alexandria. So as a result of all of this stuff that I was just mentioning, this poem, the Argonautica, is not so much a popular epic as it is an erudite epic. You're going to notice that throughout the poem there are allusions to other mythological stories, maybe that happened in the same place, you know, where the heroes happen to be, or to one of the characters. It kind of reminds the poet of something else that he read, and he tells you about it. So I was thinking, you know, because of that, while I was reading the Argonautica, if maybe we could not consider this poem to be kind of a link or maybe even a bridge between Homer and Ovid, right? The Metamorphoses, as you may know, this is kind of more like a compendium. It's a compilation of mythological stories. So in the Argonautica, you get a little bit of that, and of course a little bit of the typical epic tradition that you might be expecting. But here's another very important issue to keep in mind. This poem, the Argonautica, pays more attention to form. So because of that, you could say that maybe it's a little bit more artsy than the previous ones, the ones that came before. But here's another but, okay? At the same time, it really goes for that realism, for that verisimilitude. And what do I mean by that? Just a couple of examples. We're going to hear the thought processes of many of these characters, especially the major ones, okay? And another example of that would be that sometimes you're going to notice that if you compare the Argonautica, the same story, to, or stories, because there are many of them here, to previous renditions of them, Apollonius changed the locations sometimes. And he did that because he wanted for the settings to sort of mirror or to reflect the actual geography of the place. So he made it a little bit more real, let's put it that way. So this is very important, something important to keep in mind when you approach this poem. Let's talk about the story now, okay? Before that, very briefly, let me tell you, this poem is divided into 4 parts. The first 3 are of absolutely equal length, okay, 50 pages each. The 4th one is a little bit longer, it's about 65 pages long. But when we start reading, what happens is that we hear that King Pelias is sending Jason on a quest to fetch the golden fleece, okay? And why is he doing that? Well, King Pelias heard a prophecy that said that one day a guy wearing only one sandal was going to come and murder him. And guess who shows up one day wearing only one sandal? Jason, of course. So that is why King Pelias sends him on this journey. Now, there's a tiny detail that Apollonius doesn't tell us about at the beginning of this poem, or basically anywhere. Why was King Pelias so anxious about all this? Why was he so worried? Well, King Pelias had usurped the throne from King Aeson, and it just so happens that King Aeson was Jason's father. So there's a family thing going on right here. Apollonius doesn't tell us about that, but I think it's important to add that into the mix. Basically, the premise right here, King Pelias wants Jason out of the way, at least for a while. So what happens then is that Jason gathers a crew, and depending on the account that you read, the number of people who accompany him is different. But here we have 55 guys basically going on this journey, and they go in a ship called the Argo, hence the Argonauts of the title. Along the way, Jason and the Argonauts are going to find lots of adventures, lots of interesting creatures right there that they have to deal with. But I'm going to mention the most important ones just so that you can get a feel for the story right here. For example, the first interesting thing that happens to me is that they arrive at an island called Lemnos. And this is an island where the women have killed their husbands, and basically all the men too, not just their husbands, because the husbands had preferred to sleep with some slaves that they had captured instead of with their wives. Now, notice the irony right there. If you know the story of Jason and Medea, okay, how it ends and why Medea turns against Jason and does what she does in Euripides' play, this is a big irony happening right here in this island where the women have killed their husbands, and the reason why they did that. After that, they meet a seer named Phineas. This is another episode that stood out to me. This is a guy who has a very bad problem. Basically, every time that he sits down and he tries to eat, these awful harpies come down and they steal his food. So Jason and company have to help him with that. And they do a very good job of helping him, actually. Now, things get interesting, really, if you ask me, when we get to the midpoint of the poem, which would be the third book, because this is where Medea comes in. And Medea was made to fall in love with Jason. Let me just highlight that word right there. She was made to fall in love with him, because in this poem, as tends to happen sometimes in classical literature, the gods basically play with human beings as if they were pieces on a chessboard, and that's what happens to Medea with these feelings that she has. Now, Medea's father, this is King Aeetes. He knows where the Golden Fleece is. It's in his dominion, so he has access to it, but he wants Jason to complete a task before Jason is allowed to get to the place where the Golden Fleece is. And then, Jason can see if he can get that Golden Fleece or not. That's another story. But King Aeetes tells him, first you have to harvest some fields with 2 bronze-footed oxen that throw fire from their mouths. And after that, you have to kill the soldiers that are going to sprout from those seeds, because these seeds are not normal seeds. Okay, soldiers come out of them. So Medea, for her part, while Jason is trying to do all this stuff, she is torn between filial duty and her passion. So, am I going to help Jason, or am I going to obey my father? And we hear her thoughts. We basically are allowed to follow her thought process here very, very closely. That is a very important aspect of the Argonautica. Then we get to book 4, which is the longest. This one deals primarily with the return. In the prose translation, it is titled Homeward Bound, like that great song by Simon and Garfunkel. We meet some sirens right there. And also my favorite part of that book, the last one, is a little fight that the Argonauts have with this bronze demigod named Talus. It's a famous episode from this poem, and it happens right there, close to the end of the whole story. So I thought we might look at the depiction of Jason and Medea in the Argonautica compared to other stories of them, because you may be familiar with the story of Medea from the play by Euripides. It's a famous tragedy of the Greek tragedies. In the Argonautica, basically what happens is that we see how that whole story began. This is a How I Met Your Mother kind of thing, if you will. And most people, of course, consider Medea's actions in Euripides' play to be, of course, reprehensible, atrocious, I would say horrifying, condemnable, whatever you want to call it. And if you go beyond that, beyond Euripides, Ovid even portrays her in a negative light. What we get here is the figure of a witch. He even omits some of the reasons why Medea does the things that she does, so that she will she will end up looking even worse than she was. But Apollonius basically gives us sympathetic, I would say, portrayal of Medea. He portrays her as a victim of Eros. Okay, remember the gods are kind of playing this whole thing in their little chessboard right there. So she's a victim of love, and also Jason does not really give her the credit that she deserves. Also, related to that, some people think that there's a legacy right there of the Argonautica, maybe an influence here, of the way that the love for that Medea has for Jason, the way that it is portrayed, if you compare it to the love of Dido for Aeneas in Virgil's Aeneid. So that would be another important reason also to look at the Argonautica, another legacy that this poem has if we look at future texts right there. Now this poem, the view of love that it presents is just a really, really dark one. Love is basically portrayed as some kind of sickness that the gods send to people. It's almost like a curse, that causes people to act in ways that are irrational, contrary to their interests, to do awful things, sometimes against their own family, stuff like that. And we have to emphasize this once again. Medea is made to fall in love with Jason. And to make things worse in this poem, there's a lot of irony involved. Just as with the Greek tragedies, you have to consider that the audience is the reader, the listener. They were familiar with the stories and the turns of events. They knew how the story of Jason and Medea was going to end. So look out, for example, there's a part where Jason tells Medea how wonderful everything is going to be and how happy they are going to be when they are married. I thought that was particularly cruel on Apollonius' part. You read that and you go, wow, it's just bad. Okay, it's just bad if you know how the story continues. Now let's talk about genre. Here it comes. Okay, this is the part where you're going to be, yes, I am in Jorge's corner right here. I was thinking as I was reading the Argonautica that we might, we just might consider this poem to be some sort of a precursor to the genre of the novella. The novella, as I have said before, it's kind of my thing, so you may have been expecting something like that. The novella is the anti-epic, and here we have an epic. Or do we? Okay, so hold that thought, because I'm going to share something else with you about that in a second. But this is an episodic text, just like a novella. And because it is so much shorter than, for example, the Iliad or the Odyssey, that means that we can have less themes. We can maybe even have one leitmotif. And the structure is repetitive, right? We keep coming back to a central idea. Now, we may differ as to what we consider that central idea to be, but if somebody asks me, I would say that the central idea, that leitmotif of the novella that we keep coming back to in the Argonautica, is the idea that it doesn't really matter how smart or how strong we are, we need some kind of supernatural assistance at some point in order to be successful. That is what we keep coming back to if we read this story. It's a very dark view, okay, this idea that divine intervention is necessary, right? Because in this case, the gods are kind of playing with human beings. And as I said before, there may be others. You may come up with a different leitmotif, but I think, taking that just as a suggestion, that is definitely a possibility right there. Now, going back to the idea of whether this is an epic or not, let me raise my hand right here. There's going to be a spoiler, so if you haven't read this and you want to experience it, please mute it, or, just cover your ears and sing a song while I say this until I put my hand down again. So, is it an epic? There's a quest. Here's the spoiler. They are successful in the quest, but come on, the quest is ridiculous to begin with. This is absurd. Okay, there's no lofty ideal involved to save, a woman or to save a nation or anything like that. They're going on this quest because King Pelias wants Jason out of the way in the first place. So that's just something right there to consider when it comes to the epic nature of this poem. As you may know, there is a film adaptation. It's a little cult classic for some people, at least. Many people enjoy it very much. This film was released in the year 1963. It was directed by Don Chaffee, and it was filmed primarily in Italy. Some parts were done in England, but the locations, like the wonderful, beautiful, Greek-like locations, are actually from Italy. Regarding the actors, there was only one performer that I recognized, and that was Honor Blackman, okay, the actress. She played a Bond girl in Goldfinger. I cannot tell you her name in the movie because it's just really funny. Just look it up. But Goldfinger is one of the best Bond movies, so, and she is in that one. She plays a goddess and Jason and the Argonauts. Now, the film is loosely based on the text, so there are many differences, for example, in the order of the events, in who did what, to whom, that kind of stuff. Also in the motives involved, there is some stuff that is added. Some characters are added. The Hydra appears in the movie. In this case, what we have is not the Hydra, but just the serpent. There's some stuff that is missing. For example, the whole island of the women who kill the men, that is not in the movie. But let me tell you, this is an excellent film. Okay, I absolutely loved it. There's some great cinematography. The photography is beautiful. The camera work is really wonderful when it comes to like the action scenes and all that. And also, I mean, this was the best part for me. There are some really cool pre-computer, of course, special effects. There's just some legendary stop motion animation, especially in that fight with the skeletons. That's iconic. Okay, so if you're gonna watch at least a part, just go to the very end and watch that fight with the 7 skeletons right there. This was highly influential, especially that part in particular. Okay, filmmakers like Tim Burton have cited this as an influence. Peter Jackson for the Lord of the Rings, of course. Then, of course, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and absolutely Sam Raimi. Okay, if you've seen the Evil Dead movies, Army of Darkness, the skeletons and all that, he said that that was an homage to Jason and the Argonauts. So this is a really cool little film. I highly recommend it to you. It's very well done. Once again, keep in mind that it's very loosely adapted from the Argonautica. So why should you read the Argonautica? Let's go with a bottom line kind of section to this video. It is not the Iliad. Okay, it is not the Odyssey. What we have right here is a pocket-sized, ironic, sophisticated epic or revisionist epic, whatever reading you want to go with. And once again, I think that if Homer's works are the long novels, like, the Brothers Karamazov or 2666 or something like that, here with the Argonautica, we have our novella, our classical novella. There's great action here. Some wonderful mythological creatures, this idea of the quest. So I guess in that sense you could say it's a guy's story, but very importantly, it also features a very powerful female character who is portrayed in a sympathetic light. She is really presented to us in a sophisticated way that we can hear the way she thinks and her predicament and all that. So I really believe that this is a text that deserves your attention. And this is the best part. It's a quick read. Okay, it's just 215 pages or something like that in the verse translation, even less than that if you just read the prose version. So you can read this probably in a day or two. It took me a little bit longer, but it was a very quick read for me also. So I think you should definitely read it. And if you do, please tell me what you think about it, especially in comparison to the Iliad or the Odyssey, your expectations of the text and all that. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? I'm always happy to read them and to respond to them. Those were my 2 cents on the Argonautica by Apollonius of Rhodes. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.